Every second I thought I was going to be dead the next second. And anybody that says they didn't feel that way, they either weren't there or else they're lying.
I'll tell you things that really scared me. You laughed at some of these things after they happened, but they kept happening in new ways. There was always something terrible, scaring happening.
The noise was absolutely stupendous. The barrage of artillery, the small arms fire, the crump of mortars, that dreadful whistle of a moaning Minnie, the mortar bomb that made an eerie sound, and you wondered if it had your name on it.
It's just quiet countryside now, but when I was here in the spring of 1945, these woods, canals, and fields were the cruel battlefields in which some of us, and we were very young then, fought and died. This film tells the stories of some of those young men in battle in an attempt to describe what the front line is like. For a battlefield is an unimaginable place for those who have not been there, full of terror, horror, boredom, and courage, and most particularly, sacrifice. Sacrifice for friends and comrades, and sacrifice in the service of one's country. Looking at us now, it's easy to forget just how young we were when we faced fear and death at the front line. Most of us were barely out of high school.
In the summer of 1939, I had a summer job up in northern Ontario in a mine. And when war was declared, I came home to join the Army. My parents made me go back to school. One day, one of the teachers was giving me a bit of a rough time because I hadn't done the homework to his satisfaction. So I picked up my books and left the class. And a friend of mine, John Townsend, picked up his books and came with me. Both of us went downtown and joined the Army.
Paul Prairie joined the Irish Regiment of Canada as a private in 1939. By 1945, he had risen to the rank of major.
When the war began in 1939, I was 14 years old, and we were living in Vancouver. The war was the big news day after day, and so going into the armed forces at the end of high school just seemed to be the natural thing to do.
Donald Pruner transferred out of officer training to make sure he got to the front line as an infantryman before the war ended.
I think you hoped that it wouldn't be over before you got there, but your mother wasn't very happy about that viewpoint. She thought the longer you stayed home, the better. But it looked like a short time before the war ended, but once you got there, you were in a big hurry to get home. You know? You didn't want to stay too long. Once you'd been shot at a few times, you were glad to get out of there.
Jim Knowles got overseas in January 1945 as a gunner with the Royal Canadian Artillery.
Well, Hitler was a tyrant who had to be defeated, and there were millions of people who had to be set free, and we thought we could play a part in that. I joined up at age 18. I had to add another year, pretend I was 19, in order to be able to get overseas that much quicker. The only ticket to Europe then was if you were in the services, and I think most of us wanted to get over there and into it as soon as we could.
Alan Earp added 1 year to his age to get overseas faster with the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada.
By and large, we were convinced we were doing the right thing, and it probably was one of the few wars in which there was no question which side was in the right. We were, and we knew it.
At that time, when I joined, that was everything. All the news of everything was to do with the war. And all the young men were joining up, and that was the thing to do. I wanted to get over there. I wanted to get where the war was. I wanted to get over there and fight the Germans. That's what I joined for, and that's what I wanted to do. And it was adventure, no doubt adventure.
Ken Brimacombe was posted to England as a machinist, but volunteered to join the infantry in order to get into battle.
I was studying agriculture in Saskatoon at the university there. I was offered the opportunity to take officer training.
Stan Medland landed at D-Day as a lieutenant with the 3rd Anti-Tank Regiment of the Royal Canadian Artillery.
At that time, they were beginning the build-up for the invasion. I landed about 4 in the afternoon, which was a nice time because the infantry were already a mile or so in. Everyone was exposed one way or another to enemy fire. I suppose the most traumatic experience was an attack by 3 Messerschmitt aircraft firing machine guns and rockets, and I just happened to be talking to our battery captain and battery commander, and he saw them and yelled Jerry's, and I threw myself into a nearby slit trench, and they weren't quick enough to move, and the captain died of wounds, and the major was quite badly wounded. The sound of the machine guns was something like when you rip a piece of cloth and then magnify that maybe 1,000 times. So this terrible ripping sound, and then the explosion of the rockets right near you. And one, like, there was a tree cut off right beside my head, so I know it was pretty close.
In the hard-fought battles that followed the Allied invasion of Europe, the formidable German armies were slowly pushed out of France and up the length of the Italian peninsula. We were young and inexperienced, but we quickly learned the harsh lessons of war and contributed more than our share of blood, sweat, and tears in the advance.
We had an expression in the Army. We called it the fog of war. So many times and so often, we didn't know what was happening. There are times when you get an order and you don't know why or what it's all about. But we had to trust each other. I had to trust the commanding officer that this was the right thing to do. And the men below me had to trust me, even though it wasn't my order or my plan. I was the one passing on the order. We had to trust each other. And we had to trust the people off beside us that they were going to do their job.
But as we pressed in on Germany and victory seemed to be in reach, we were faced with a fanatic and cornered Nazi regime desperate to defend its borders with any and all means. The beaten but not yet defeated German army was still a deadly foe, determined to use its experience and resources to prevent an easy Allied victory. As the war dragged on, the casualty rates mounted.
We had many casualties in the regiment because we were infantry. We were up in the front. But people behind, the artillery and everything, they had casualties from shells coming back. Casualties were not always just people shot or wounded. Many people just couldn't stand the strain anymore. And this is not putting them down. It was a real tough go.
As young recruits, we had worried that we might miss out on the war completely. Now we found ourselves on the front line, just in time for the last 100 bloody days of the war.
It was very difficult for people who were the first time in the line when they started getting shelled. You're lying down on the ground and shells are landing around you. You expect the next one to hit you.
They took us in trucks, I guess, up through Belgium and through Holland and into Germany. And we were marching up this road in single file, a great long string of us, and these little trucks were coming back, 1,500 weights, and you'd turn to look and see what was in the back of them, and tied in the back of these little trucks, they're little short trucks, so the guys' boots were hanging out. They were all all corpses, Canadian soldiers, piled right up to the roof with their boots tied together with binder twine. And I thought to myself, my God, I'm going where these poor burgers just come from, you know. And that was the first, that's when you start to think, well, this isn't a game, this is deadly serious.
We were reinforcements to the artillery in Italy, and they move all the reinforcements up in the dark. So we crawl up in the dark, and you're quaking in your boots, and things are going bang in the dark. And a couple of them are all in on it, and they say, have you got a watch? And I say, oh yeah, I got a watch. They say, well, can I have it? And I said, what do you mean? Well, when you get killed, can I have your watch? The other fellow says, how long do those last reinforcements last? I think it was 3 or 4 days, wasn't it, Fred? It's all a put-up job, but you're quaking in your boots. The older ones had been killed off or wounded, so we were somewhat younger. I was just turned 19 by then, I guess, and anybody got to be 30 was known as Pops. And if he lasted that long. But they tried to rotate them, and if you're wounded 3 times, you get sent home. But it's kind of a dangerous way of getting home.
As a 19-year-old pretending to be 20 and finding myself in command of a platoon of men, some of whom had already seen 4 or 5 months of action, this was a challenge. And I was very anxious that they would see that I could take it. Of course, I was scared, but I didn't want them to see that I was scared. I was anxious to satisfy myself that I could take it too. Kapellschevere, that was in fact the first battle in which I was actively and personally involved. We had to get the Germans out of a small island that was on our side of the river in Holland. And there had been a number of attempts by the British, the Poles, and now a Canadian unit to dislodge them, and these hadn't succeeded. A lot of lives had been lost. But we managed to get up there on the dike, and better still, we managed to get 3 tanks up with us. And that's what turned the tide of battle. I used the weapons that I had, but it was so cold that my Sten gun froze. And then I was lucky that I got a machine gun, a 50 caliber machine gun from the tank commander, and was able to set that up and blaze away with that, which gave us some covering fire. And so we were able to do the job and then pull back to the comparative comfort of our slit trenches. As I stayed in that slit trench, I'll never forget the body of a German soldier that was perhaps some 10, 12 feet away on the side of the dike that had been run over by our tank and was squashed into an obscene mess, mercifully frozen by the extreme cold. And so to spend a night in that situation afterwards soon disposed of any sense of satisfaction with my first engagement.
For the very young officer as I was, and I was very young and very inexperienced, coming into, say, a troop, as I did, take command of a troop where some of the men were nearly double my age, sergeants much more experienced, and worse than that, I looked so young. And years later, one of the fellows told me that when I took over the troop, he said to his buddy, "We've hit the bottom of the barrel." So what you do is you try to just do the best job you can, remembering that if you make a serious mistake, that's lives at stake.
They do anything they can to make you a better soldier. They don't do it on purpose, but one of the first ones we buried, and we only buried them down an inch or so, and he says, "Put that fellow's teeth back in." And I said, "Gee, Sergeant, there's only top half of a man." He said, "Doesn't matter." He said, "Just do what I tell you. Put the teeth in." I had to open him up and put his teeth in. But the idea was to make me a tougher guy, and the next time I wouldn't be in quaking in my boots.
I don't think I risked the lives of my men unnecessarily. It's not your own life that you're thinking about, it's the other guys. And if you can pull it off without exposing them to more danger than is necessary, then there's an element of satisfaction.
One of the experiences I remember particularly in Holland, we were in an anti-tank role, but because it was all flooded, there were no enemy tanks, so they used us as infantry. And we had an assignment of clearing some canal area. My friend, Bert Conley from Saskatchewan, was ordered to take his men up the center of this double canal, ran into a heavy enemy machine gun, and he was killed, and quite a number of his men were killed and wounded. We came under fire from a house across the way, and we were pinned down there, and these bullets were thudding into the ground. In battle, you don't really know who's being killed and who's being wounded. You are so busy trying to look after yourself and look after the enemy, and if you're an officer, look after your men and your equipment. I was sent up to see if I could get that troop out of there. But in fact, I couldn't do anything from where I was, and it wasn't until the next day that I found out that he was one of the ones that had been killed. I have trouble. Pardon? Or maybe, I don't know, do much good. My friend and I had been quite close. In fact, I had introduced him to the girl that he had hoped to marry. It was a family that I had met when I arrived overseas, and they'd made my home, or made their home my home. And so I had taken him there one weekend, and he met the daughter, a charming young lady. So it was a real loss.
The first action that I ever took part in was the attack on a town called Wien, which was just on the west bank of the Rhine. It was more a formality. The Germans had pretty well accepted the fact that they'd lost the west bank of the Rhine, and we were just going to kind of drive up and occupy the town.
Well, that was the worst of all, that attack on Wien. The early morning of the 7th of March, as soon as the Germans were aware we were coming, they started shooting up parachute flares, which floated down and very slowly and lit up the whole landscape like high noon. You could see everything. And then, of course, you went to ground immediately and hoped that they didn't see any movement because, of course, the Germans, you know, they were all in the basements of these farmhouses and outbuildings and behind trees and in the trenches they dug. They didn't have to move. You just shot in the direction where they were.
The obvious thing to do when someone's shooting at you is to get down on the ground and stay there. But you can't do that, or you'll probably all be killed or captured. So you have to get up and advance. You have to take aggressive action. And to do so, you have to expose yourself to being killed or wounded.
It ended up, instead of being 2 companies that made the attack, which would be 6 platoons, there was only 2 platoons, probably 30 men.
In a way which I still don't comprehend to this day, the platoon I was in somehow lost our way. We came under some fire from people on our flank, but nobody was killed. And unfortunately for the other 2 platoons and the company headquarters, they came under very heavy fighting and were, for the most part, killed or captured.
shortly after we started on this charge, Sergeant Smith got shot. He got shot right across the chest, and I remember tearing his tunic open, and the blood was still bubbling in the holes in his chest. So he was done for. There was nothing you could do with him. So I guess we kept on going. And we continued on our charge, and other people got hit too on the way. And we were like wild people, you know. And when you were in action, it's not like you were insane, but you were certainly, your whole mood was different. You were wild men, I would say you were wild, and scared. In the actual attacks, you were scared. You were scared.
I was aware that there was some kind of disaster going on, but it wasn't immediately close to me, and I couldn't see anything, and so I was kind of intellectually aware that something was going terribly wrong, but it wasn't immediately affecting me, so that it didn't give me a sense of personal fright.
We fired all we had. I fired all the Bren gun ammunition I had, and the magazines held 30 rounds, and then we threw our grenades at this building in front of us. We threw our grenades, and that was all we had. And there was nobody behind us. There was the other platoon, the other company had long gone. They'd gone back where it was safe to be. So there was nothing left to do but surrender, unless you wanted to get shot, I guess, or I don't know, but everybody likes to live. So we hollered "Kamerad," which is what the Germans used to call it, to surrender to us. So we called it "Kamerad" and held our hands up. The Germans came out then when we surrendered, and we wrapped our arms around each other, traded cigarettes, just like at the end of a football game, when we were the losers, they were the winners, and those people that we were actually shooting against 10 minutes before, they wrapped their arms around us.
My sergeant came along and told me to take 2 other men and to go up the road, the main road towards town, to the town of Veen, and see if I could find out what was happening and report back. So I started up the road with these 2 men, and we'd gone, I don't know, 500 or 600 yards. And I think it was 2 men came running down the road, 2 Canadian soldiers, 2 Argylls. And they were running in an absolute panic and sobbing, and really broken down men, you know, really frightened right out of their minds. And when my company moved up into the town, I could see Canadian soldiers, dead soldiers, lying out in the fields, lying pretty well where they had been shot. And that was a very sobering experience to see men lying out there in the field, people that perhaps you'd known who were now dead. And the impact came on you then that you realized your own mortality.
Don Bird joined the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion in time to be dropped behind the German lines in the largest airborne operation of the war.
The one thing that we always liked about training drops was that once you got out of the aircraft, you got rid of all that noise and vibration and the aroma of the fuel on the airplane and the confinement. And even though your kidneys might be full, you were still relieved to get out in the fresh air and the sunshine. But in this case, you came out into a chaos of noise, confusion, smoke, cordite, if you know that expression, gunpowder. When I got close to the ground, I could see parachutes in their collapsed position on the ground, and in some cases there were bodies at the end of them. I wasn't aware of ever having received fire at me, and there were only 5 out of 10 of us that reached the rounding. We're behind the German front line at this point, you see, and they were withdrawing from the Rhine River because our guys were coming across the river. And I remember firing at a whole platoon information, just walking down this river creek lowland there, and that was a nasty bit of engagement because these guys took to the ditches and fired back. My mate beside me was killed in the operation at that particular point, brought it all vividly to me. Shot right through the forehead. It was all over.
By the time we were there, they were pretty hard stretched for reinforcements, and some were quite old. Some were 45, and some others were quite young. And we did attack one place where the fellow stood up, swung his machine gun by the barrel. It was empty, and he was going to kill me with the barrel. I was going to tackle him, and it seemed like an easy, I could have easily done it. The fellow beside me shot him, and then when we buried him, we found he was 14, which is terrible when you think of it. But he was just as vicious and as mean as we were.
I don't think you can ever train people for the experience of combat, for the impact that it has on you when you realize that there are people firing live bullets at you and the shells exploding that might kill you. In the instances where I had to fire at German soldiers, I did so without any hesitation. It was what I was trained to do. Now, mind you, after the war, I did have some, a few dreams and a few wakeful hours in the night thinking about the fact that I killed people.
In one position, we're just outside Amersfoort. I can still hear my squeaky voice challenging this challenge, and these shadows all stop. And I didn't know what to do, except they could have been this next regiment, or could have been our night patrol coming in from someplace else, could have been a German patrol. So I called the password again, and they hit the ground, and I fired all at the same time. But I had a Sten gun, and the Sten gun jammed, and so I ran at 50 yards to the troop, where my troop was, and my job was to make sure they were awake. It was exactly what I was supposed to do, but I felt after that had I done something braver or something, not quite right, but something that was a thought of protecting my own people, but not killing these other guys. Did I have to kill them? And if I killed them, I don't even know that I did kill them, and I know I probably killed them, but now, in the middle of the night, sometimes you wake up and you, what do you say, 3 o'clock in the morning, it's 50 years later, you're still thinking.
I think, particularly towards the end of events, I mean, realizing that one had survived for quite a long time without actually getting hit, and the survival rate for young lieutenants in the infantry was pretty brief, and after about 3 months, you realize that was likely that your turn would come up quite soon. But you didn't think about that too much, and I suppose really about 1 in 5 would be killed. What you hoped most, of course, is that I think we all knew we were likely to get hit. We just hoped that it wasn't going to be fatal, or that it wasn't going to be something that would paralyze us for the rest of our lives. I finally became a casualty by not keeping my head down when I should have done, I suppose. We were in an attack in Germany. By now we were getting close to the end of the war and knew that couldn't be far away. We were setting up our tactical headquarters, and things were going very well. The rifle companies ahead of us were getting onto the objective. And then I looked out and saw a large number of Germans streaming out of the woods. And then very shortly we found ourselves under attack, and we really weren't equipped to resist very effectively. And so we were in a house that was largely surrounded by enemy anxious to get in. We had some prisoners in the cellar who were anxious to get out. And it was another very small-scale but intense battle, and of course for me quite personal. They were almost climbing in the windows, and they got a grenade in that killed 2 of my men, and I was trying to shoot with a rifle when a guy with a submachine gun got me first.
I was going back with a fellow named Donnelly, and we were crawling along in the ditch, and then we'd run a bit, and then crawl some more in the ditch and run a bit. And then we, I guess rather stupidly, but Donnelly and I decided that we'd gone back far enough running and crawling and so on that we could just walk the rest of the way. We were suddenly hit by a burst of, I think a burst of machine gun fire, and Donnelly went down, and I was struck by a bullet that hit me in the left side of my back and kind of skidded around my rib cage and went through my left bicep. And of course, we were both down the ditch at that point. I could hear Donnelly calling for help. The experience of being wounded was, it felt sort of like a hot poker being stuck in my side. And my arm felt like somebody just hit it with a sledgehammer, a real sudden hard blow, and then the whole arm went numb. So I didn't have a lot of pain at that time.
In Holland, near Wyward, which is on the Ems River across from Germany, we were to make the attack to seize the bridge so that the armored in the morning could go across and take the town of Delfzijl. We captured 2 Germans. My batsman could talk German, and he interpreted these fellows. I heard a machine going, a diesel. I asked through my batsman, the Germans, what that diesel was, and they said it was a generator for electricity for the headquarters. I didn't believe them, because our generators are all gasoline putt-putt-putts, and this was the longer sounding diesel.